It's a Sunday afternoon in Victoria, British Columbia, a small coastal city on the southern tip of Canada, the kind of place with flower baskets on the lampposts and a harbor full of sailboats. March 24th, 1991. The wind is up. A mother crouches down in a school parking lot and ties the hood of her son's blue jacket a little tighter, because it's cold, and because that's what you do before a football practice on a windy field. Her name is Michael Dunahee. Her son is 4 years old. His name is Michael. He's wearing that blue hooded jacket with the red lining, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles t-shirt, rainbow-colored rugby pants, and blue sneakers. He's exactly the kind of 4-year-old you'd expect. A little loud, a little fearless, obsessed with turtles that fight crime in a sewer. There's a playground about 40 meters from where his mother is about to play a game of touch football. Michael asks if he can go play on it while she practices. She says yes. But for a second, just a second, something in her stomach tightens. A feeling. She'll describe it, decades later, as tummy butterflies. She'll say she still regrets not listening to them. There is nothing unusual about this moment. It is, in fact, the single most ordinary moment a parent can experience. The short, unremarkable act of letting a child out of arm's reach for a few minutes in a public place, surrounded by dozens of other adults, in broad daylight. Every parent watching this video has made that exact decision 100 times without a second thought. That is precisely what makes what happens next so hard to sit with. She tells Michael to stay right there. Wait for Daddy. Don't go anywhere with anyone. He nods. He walks toward the playground, and somewhere in the space of a few hundred footsteps, surrounded by roughly 50 people, meters from both of his parents, in the middle of a public park in broad daylight, Michael Dunahee disappears. No one saw him taken. No one heard him scream. To this day, 35 years later, with over 11,000 tips submitted to police, not one confirmed witness has ever come forward to say what happened in that playground. This is one of the largest missing person investigations in Canadian history, and it remains, to this hour, completely unsolved. This is the story of Michael Dunahee. Stay with me until the end, because there's a detail about the last 5 minutes before he vanished that investigators still can't explain, and a sighting decades later that made his own mother question everything she thought she knew. To understand why this case broke a city in half, you have to understand what Victoria was in 1991. It's the capital of British Columbia, sitting on the southern edge of Vancouver Island, separated from the mainland by a stretch of the Salish Sea. It's a small city, genteel, almost old-fashioned, the kind of place that markets itself on hanging flower baskets and afternoon tea. Violent crime wasn't the story Victoria told about itself. Child abduction especially was something that happened somewhere else, in a headline from Toronto or Los Angeles, not in a schoolyard 4 blocks from your own house. Michael Wayne Dunahee was born on May 12, 1986, to Crystal and Bruce Dunahee. By 1991, he had a baby sister, Caitlin, just 6 months old. Family, friends, and neighbors would later describe Michael the way people always describe the children at the center of these stories, and it's worth pausing on, because it's not just sentiment, it's context. He was known as an energetic, affectionate kid, good with his baby sister, the kind of brother who liked to snuggle up next to her in family photos. On the day he disappeared, the Dunahee family drove to Blanshard Elementary School, on the site that today sits at 950 Kings Road in the Quadra Village neighborhood of Victoria. It was an ordinary Sunday errand. Crystal had a women's flag football practice, part of a local league, and Bruce came along to watch with Caitlin. They arrived around 12:30 in the afternoon. The field where the football practice was happening sat right next to a public playground. Swings, a slide, the usual structure, separated from the field by only a short distance. Michael could see his parents. His parents, in theory, could see him. He asked to go play. Crystal said yes, but she made sure, really made sure, that he understood the rule. Stay at the playground. Wait for Daddy. Don't leave with anyone. She has spoken about this moment publicly, many times over the past 3.5 decades, and there is a detail she always returns to: the hesitation. The gut feeling she had and overruled. It is, in the language of true crime, One of those moments a family replays for the rest of their lives. The ordinary decision, made 1,000 times before without incident, that this one time became the last normal moment of their old life. It helps to understand who Michael was before he becomes, in the rest of this story, mostly a photograph and a sketch. By every account from people who knew the family, he was a typical, happy preschooler, navigating an entirely typical suburban Canadian childhood. He liked cartoons. He liked the Ninja Turtles enough to insist on the shirt that day. He was, according to family friends, protective of his baby sister, in the particular, slightly bossy way 4-year-olds are protective of infants, proud of being the big brother, eager to show her off. Crystal and Bruce were, by every description available in the decades of reporting on this case, an unremarkable young Victoria couple, a mother active in a local sports league, a father who showed up to support her on his day off with a 6-month-old strapped to him. There is nothing in the record, nothing, to suggest anything about that Sunday was different from a dozen other Sundays that spring, except for the outcome. That's worth sitting with, because it's the thing that makes this case land so hard for anyone who hears it. There was no warning sign. No custody dispute, no estranged relative with a grudge, no pattern of neglect for a true crime narrative to hang a "here's what went wrong" thesis on. Just two parents doing exactly what millions of parents do every weekend, in a country that, at the time, did not think of playgrounds as dangerous places. Bruce finished setting up on the field and walked the short distance to the playground to collect his son. Michael wasn't there. Let's slow down on the geography here for a second, because it matters. This wasn't a case of a child wandering off into open wilderness, or getting lost in a crowded mall, or slipping away during a chaotic event with hundreds of strangers. Blanshard Elementary's playground sat in a contained, mostly residential pocket of Victoria, bordered by streets, houses, and the football field itself. Crystal has said publicly that she could see the playground from where she was practicing. Bruce could see it too, from the sidelines. This was not a situation where a 4-year-old had dozens of possible directions to vanish into unnoticed. It was a small, visible, occupied space, which is exactly why what happened next confused investigators from the very first hour. At first, it wasn't panic, it was confusion, the kind any parent recognizes, that 3-second window where you assume your kid just wandered off to look at something. Bruce checked around the equipment. He checked behind the school. He called Michael's name. Nothing. Then the confusion tipped into something else. Word spread through the football practice fast. Within minutes, roughly 50 people, players, spectators, parents on the sidelines, fanned out across the school grounds calling Michael's name. 50 sets of eyes, in the middle of the day, searching a contained area and finding no trace of a 4-year-old boy in a bright blue jacket. Bruce and Crystal called the police immediately. What followed, within hours, became, at the time, the largest police investigation in Victoria's history. Officers descended on the school. They searched every inch of the playground, the field, the surrounding streets, storm drains, dumpsters, wooded areas nearby. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters passed overhead. By nightfall, what had started as a school playground was treated as an active crime scene, and what had started as a missing child call was already being quietly reclassified by detectives as something far more serious. And here is the detail that made this case different from almost every other missing child case Canadian police had worked before. Nobody saw it happen. Not one of those 50 people. Not the other parents at the game. Not the players on the field. Not, as far as anyone has ever been able to prove, a single person walking a dog or driving past on King's Road. A 4-year-old in a distinctive blue and red hooded jacket, in the middle of a public event, on a Sunday afternoon, vanished in a way that left no eyewitness account. Not to an abduction, not to him wandering off, not to anything at all. Statistically, that's almost impossible. Most child abduction cases, even the ones that end tragically, leave some trace in the first hour. A partial license plate, a description of a stranger, a scream someone half remembers. Michael Dunahee's case left none of that. It is part of why, more than 3 decades later, investigators still describe this as one of the most confounding files in Canadian police history. By the following day, police made the call that changed the entire framing of the case. They classified Michael's disappearance as an abduction. Once that word, abduction, was attached to the file, the entire machinery of Canadian law enforcement shifted. This was no longer a search and rescue operation looking for a lost child. It was now functionally a criminal investigation with an invisible suspect and a 4-year-old victim. Detectives began building a timeline down to the minute. Every person who had been at that football practice was interviewed. Every registered offender within a wide radius of Victoria was reviewed. Cadaver dogs were brought in, a detail that, even now, is difficult to sit with, because it tells you exactly how seriously and how quickly investigators had to consider the worst possible outcome, even while publicly holding on to hope alongside the family. The Ministry of Highways searched storm drains and culverts near the school. Divers searched a nearby creek. Police went door to door through the surrounding neighborhood, sometimes multiple times, asking residents if they'd seen anything. A car idling too long, a stranger who didn't belong, a child's cry cut short. Nothing anyone could offer moved the investigation forward in any concrete way. Within 48 hours, headlines across the country were calling it exactly that. In the days after Michael vanished, one lead rose above the noise. A witness came forward describing a man seen in or near the area around the time Michael disappeared, described as being in his late 40s or early 50s. That witness also described a vehicle, a brown van, seen in the vicinity of the school. Police took this seriously enough to commission a composite sketch, sometimes referred to in later reporting as the witness suspect sketch, and released it publicly, hoping someone would recognize the man. About a month after Michael disappeared, investigators staged a full reenactment at Blanshard Elementary, using a brown van similar to the one described, hoping the visual would jog someone's memory into providing new detail. It didn't work. No new information came from the reenactment. The composite sketch never led to an identified suspect. The brown van was never conclusively tied to the case. To this day, whether that sighting had anything to do with Michael's disappearance, or whether it was a bystander who simply happened to be in the area, has never been established. This is one of the cruelest features of a cold case like this one. A lead that feels significant. A described man, a described van, a police-issued sketch, can consume investigative resources for months and then simply evaporate, leaving behind nothing but a face that was never confirmed to belong to anyone connected to the crime at all. What we do know is the scale of the response that followed. Nearly 100 police officers, drawn from Victoria and agencies across the lower mainland of British Columbia, were pulled into the search in the days after Michael's disappearance. The RCMP got involved. At various points over the following decades, according to family and press accounts, American agencies, including the FBI, were consulted, given the possibility Michael had been taken across the border. Hundreds of volunteers combed wooded areas around Victoria on foot. Divers searched nearby waterways. Every registered sex offender in the region was reportedly reviewed as part of the initial sweep. And still, nothing. No body, no confirmed sighting, no confession, no trace. In the first days after Michael vanished, the Victoria Police Department was reportedly receiving hundreds of tips an hour. This was 1991, before searchable databases, before tip portals, before any of the digital infrastructure police rely on today. Officers wrote incoming leads down on carbon paper, by hand, trying to keep pace with a flood of information from a public that was, understandably, terrified and desperate to help. Over the more than 3 decades since, that number has grown almost unimaginably large. Victoria Police have said publicly that they've received upwards of 11,000 tips in Michael's case, one of the largest volumes of public leads ever generated by a single missing person investigation in Canada. Let's talk about a few of the leads that actually went somewhere, because they tell you a lot about what a family like the Dunahees has had to survive, over and over again, for 35 years. The Chase Theory, 2006. Residents in the small interior British Columbia town of Chase put forward a theory that a young man living locally might actually be Michael, all grown up. It gained enough traction locally that police pursued it formally. A DNA test was conducted. It was not a match. The Milwaukee Connection, 2018. This one made international headlines, and if you've followed serial killer cases, the name attached to it might sound familiar, for other reasons entirely. A man named Vernon Seitz, then 62 years old and in custody in Milwaukee, reportedly confessed to his psychiatrist that he had killed one boy back in 1959 and separately claimed knowledge of another child killing. Investigators, including CBC News, contacted Michael Dunahee about a possible link. She declined to comment until she had more information. The connection to Michael's case was never substantiated. It remains, in the public record, an open thread that was investigated and did not produce a confirmed link, one of dozens of leads over the decades that briefly reopened the wound before closing again without resolution. The Surrey Man, 2012. Perhaps the most publicly dramatic of these false leads. That year, the Dunahee family released a new age-enhanced composite image, an estimate, produced with forensic artists, of what Michael would look like at 26 years old, the age he would have been that year. Shortly after, a man in Surrey, British Columbia, roughly the same age, posted a photo of himself to an online Vancouver Canucks hockey forum, inviting users to compare his face against the composite. He mentioned that his family had moved around frequently during his childhood. He mentioned that his father had left when he was young. He mentioned that his mother had recently passed away. For a moment, on that hockey forum, hundreds of strangers held their breath. Police followed up. A DNA test was conducted. It was not a match. The forum thread was quietly taken down, out of respect for the man's privacy, and the case folded back into silence. This has become almost a pattern across the decades of this investigation. Every few years, someone resembling the aged-up sketches comes forward, or is reported by someone who knew them, and every single time, repeatedly, publicly, painfully, DNA testing has ruled them out. Multiple people who resemble the missing boy have been tested against Michael's DNA profile over more than 3 decades. None has ever matched. And then there were the leads that never had any scientific weight at all, but that a grieving family still had to sit with. Psychics contacted the Dunahees over the years with visions and predictions. Every one of them, like every DNA test, like every sighting, like every anonymous call, led nowhere. It's also worth understanding just how far this case traveled beyond Victoria and beyond Canada entirely. Michael's photograph and story were circulated across North America through missing children's networks in the early 1990s. His case was profiled internationally, and, remarkably for a Canadian missing persons file, it was featured on the American television program America's Most Wanted on 5 separate occasions, a program better known for hunting fugitives than searching for missing children, brought in specifically because of the scale and mystery of Michael's disappearance. Every appearance generated a fresh wave of tips. None of them, ultimately, produced the boy. Over 3.5 decades, 4 broad theories have circulated, some pursued formally by police, some that exist mostly in public speculation and true crime forums, but all of them worth knowing, because together they show you just how wide open this case really is. Theory 1. Opportunistic stranger abduction. The most straightforward, and the one investigators have treated as most plausible from day one. A person unrelated to the family, present at or near the school that day, who took advantage of a brief window of opportunity. This theory is supported by the brown van sighting and the composite sketch, but undermined by the fact that no one, not one person among 50 witnesses, reported seeing an unfamiliar adult near Michael in that window. Theory 2. Abduction by someone who wanted to raise a child as their own. This theory has circulated for years in press coverage and podcast investigations of the case. The idea that Michael wasn't taken to be harmed, but taken to be kept, by someone unable to have children of their own, or grieving a lost child. It's a theory that offers the family something almost unbearable to hold on to. The possibility, however statistically unlikely after 35 years, that Michael grew up, under a different name, in a different life, unaware of the search still happening for him. Theory 3. A targeted taking connected to a specific individual. Some investigators and independent researchers, including journalists who've spent years on the case, have pointed to specific persons of interest over the decades. Men with histories that made them plausible enough to investigate, including the Milwaukee case we just covered. None has ever been formally, publicly confirmed as connected. Theory 4. And this one is largely relegated to internet speculation with no evidentiary basis. A satanic panic era theory, reflecting the broader cultural anxieties of the early 1990s, when a wave of unfounded ritual abuse allegations swept through parts of North America. It has never been substantiated in any way, and most serious researchers of the case dismiss it. But it persists in message boards and comment sections to this day, a strange artifact of the era Michael disappeared in. None of these theories has ever been proven. That is, itself, the headline of this entire case. After 35 years, one of the largest investigations in Canadian history, and 11,000 tips, investigators still cannot tell you with confidence which of these 4 broad explanations, if any of them, is the true one. There is a version of this story that's only about the mystery. But the Dunahee case isn't really about a cold file sitting in an evidence room. It's about 2 people who have spent more than half their lives refusing to let their son become a statistic. Crystal and Bruce Dunahee have never stopped searching. 7 weeks after Michael disappeared, on what would have been his 5th birthday, which also happened to fall on Mother's Day that year, the family held a special mass at Esquimalt's Our Lady of Peace Church, praying for his safe return. Decades later, they still attend that same church regularly. In the years that followed, the family built and maintained a website, michaeldunahee.ca, a hub for tips, updates, and the increasingly haunting series of age-progressed images that have tracked what Michael might look like as he aged. As a 21-year-old, a 26-year-old, a 34-year-old, each new image is its own kind of grief. Crystal Dunahee has spoken about how difficult it is to look at a computer-generated rendering of the adult son she has never actually met, a stranger's face standing in for the boy she remembers. On the 25th anniversary of Michael's disappearance, Crystal told CBC News that the pain had never dulled with time. Her exact words, that it still felt like yesterday, that the wounds hadn't healed, that she didn't know if they ever would. Michael's sister Caitlin has her own version of this grief, one shaped entirely around absence. She was 6 months old when her brother vanished, which means she has no memory of him at all. Everything she knows about her own brother comes from photographs and family stories, that he was affectionate, that he was good with her as a baby, that he used to snuggle up next to her for pictures. Growing up, she said, she didn't realize how unusual her childhood was until she started school and other kids began asking about her missing brother. That was the moment, she said, that she understood her family's normal wasn't anyone else's normal. She grew up with an earlier curfew than her friends. She had to call home before leaving anyone's house. Her parents' fear, forged in a single afternoon in 1991, shaped every year of her upbringing. Out of that grief, the family built something that has outlasted almost every other part of this story. The Michael Dunahee, Keep the Hope Alive, Walk and Run. Every year, on or around the anniversary of his disappearance, the Dunahee family leads a 5-kilometer walk through Esquimalt, near Victoria, raising both awareness of Michael's case and funds for Child Find BC, a nonprofit organization that helps other families experiencing the disappearance of a child. Crystal and Bruce have been directly involved in Child Find BC's work for years, turning their own unresolved loss into an organization built to help other parents avoid living the same nightmare, or to help them if they do. Bruce Dunahee has said, in recent years, that he now has grandchildren of his own, children who have never met their uncle, and who he hopes one day will. That is the horizon this family has been walking toward for 35 years. Not closure in the way true crime often frames it. Not a trial, not a verdict, just the possibility, however small it has become, that Michael is still out there. Part of the reason Michael Dunahee's case has stayed this alive in the public imagination, 35 years on, is that it has never stopped being told. In the years after his disappearance, Victoria author Valerie Green published a book examining the case in depth, launched at a fundraiser benefiting Child Find BC, its cover built around one of the last photographs taken of Michael before he vanished. More recently, independent Vancouver Island journalist Laura Palmer spent over a year interviewing roughly 50 people connected to Michael and to the investigation for a 10-episode podcast series that dug into potential suspects and unresolved leads in far more depth than any single news segment ever could. Other true crime podcasts and YouTube channels, including, now, this one, have kept returning to this case, not because it's easy to solve, but because it refuses to resolve, and because somewhere, a family is still listening for the phone to ring. That's not incidental to this story. It's a core part of it. Every retelling, every video, every podcast episode is also, functionally, another public appeal. Every time Michael's face, or the sketch of the man he might have become, reaches a new audience, it's another few thousand people who now know what to look for. So where does the investigation actually stand? More than 3 decades later, Victoria Police have been unusually consistent about one thing. They have never downgraded this file. Michael Dunahee's case remains formally classified as an active, open investigation, and a Victoria police officer is specifically assigned to it on an ongoing basis. Not a cold case generalist working a stack of old files, but a dedicated point of contact for a single 35-year-old case. In 2021, on the 30th anniversary of Michael's disappearance, police and the family unveiled a new age-enhanced forensic sketch, created by BC RCMP forensic artist Corporal Virginia Bernier, who worked closely with the family to incorporate genetic traits and family resemblance into the rendering, an estimate of what Michael would look like at 34 years old. Alongside the sketch, VicPD launched a dedicated online tip portal, making it easier than ever for the public to submit information directly and securely. That portal has worked, in the sense that it's kept information flowing. Police say they've followed up on hundreds of leads submitted through it since 2021 alone. None, so far, has produced the breakthrough this case needs. On the 35th anniversary in March of 2026, Victoria Police once again renewed their public appeal, alongside Greater Victoria Crime Stoppers, urging anyone with information, no matter how small it might seem, to come forward. VicPD's Deputy Chief, Michael Brown, spoke directly to that point at the anniversary event, emphasizing that this remains, in his words, a very much open, active, and ongoing investigation, and that any piece of information, even something that feels trivial to the person holding it, could be the piece that matters. That same year's Keep the Hope Alive walk, the 35th annual event, drew roughly 230 participants in person in Esquimalt, plus others joining remotely from cities and towns across the country. Bruce Dunahee told reporters that seeing that many people still show up, still care, still remember Michael's name after 35 years, gives him strength. It's worth stepping back and putting this case in a wider context, because the numbers involved are genuinely staggering. This is widely described as one of the largest missing child investigations and the longest-running missing child search in Canadian history. Over 11,000 tips, nearly 100 officers involved in the initial search, multiple police agencies, from local Victoria Police to the RCMP to consultations with agencies south of the border. Decades of DNA testing on people who resembled the aged-up sketches. 3 major forensic age progression images released to the public, each one an attempt to keep Michael's face, an ever-changing, ever-uncertain face, in front of the people who might recognize him. And after all of that, no arrest, no named suspect ever formally charged. No confirmed sighting, no remains, just a 4-year-old boy, and then an absence that has now lasted longer than most marriages, longer than most careers, long enough that the infant sister he used to snuggle in family photographs now has children of her own, who call her brother, the uncle we've never met. It's worth sitting with what modern investigative technology can and can't do here, because it explains why this case has outlasted so many others. DNA testing, in 1991, barely existed as an investigative tool in the way we understand it today. The technology simply hadn't matured enough to be the kind of instant identifier it is now. Facial recognition software didn't exist at all. Cell phone geolocation, license plate reading cameras, searchable tip databases, none of it. Michael disappeared into a version of Canada that had almost none of the forensic infrastructure that exists now, which means the initial investigation, however massive, was working with comparatively primitive tools. What's changed since is significant. Modern DNA testing means that any credible match, a set of skeletal remains recovered anywhere in North America, a person who comes forward with reasonable doubt about their own childhood, can be checked against Michael's family DNA profile with scientific certainty, which is exactly how the Chase and Surrey leads were both definitively closed. The 2021 TIP portal digitized a process that used to run on carbon paper, and the age progression sketch technology has become significantly more sophisticated, incorporating not just generic aging algorithms, but specific family bone structure and genetic markers, worked into the most recent renderings by RCMP forensic artists in direct consultation with Crystal and Bruce. None of that has produced an answer yet, but it does mean that if Michael Dunahee is alive somewhere, living under a name that isn't his, in a life he may not even know is built on someone else's tragedy, the tools that could confirm it, if the right tip ever comes in, now exist in a way they simply didn't in 1991. Before we close this one out, I want to sit with the three things about this case that genuinely don't add up. The reasons investigators and true crime researchers, and honestly, anyone who spends time with this file, comes away unsettled. First, the total absence of witnesses. 50 people, in a public place, on a Sunday afternoon, and not one confirmed account of what happened to Michael in the window, between his mother saying yes and his father arriving to find him gone. Either someone moved fast enough and quietly enough to take a 4-year-old without a single adult noticing in a crowded park, which is its own kind of chilling, or something happened that doesn't fit the abduction narrative at all, and to this day, no alternative explanation has ever been substantiated either. Second, the composite sketch that never connected to anyone. A described man, a described van, an official police sketch, a staged reenactment, and then nothing. No name, no plate number, no confirmed link to Michael's case at all, 35 years on. Was that man simply a stranger in the wrong place at the wrong time who was frightened off by the scale of the police response and never came forward again? Or was he the last person to see Michael Dunahee, walking free for over 3 decades? Third, the DNA tests that keep almost working, and never do. Multiple times over multiple decades, someone has surfaced who resembles the aged sketches closely enough that police took the lead seriously enough to run a DNA test. Every single time, the answer has been no. Statistically, that's a strange kind of coincidence to keep happening. Enough plausible near matches to justify repeated forensic testing, but never the real thing. It speaks to how widely Michael's face, both the 4-year-old original and each successive age-progressed version, has been seen and recognized by the Canadian public for 35 straight years. There is no ending to give you here. That's not a cop-out. It's the honest, uncomfortable truth of this case. Michael Dunahee is still, as of this recording, a missing person. Not a cold case in the sense of a case police have given up on. Vic PD has been explicit, repeatedly, publicly, that this file stays open, staffed and active, but cold in the sense that time has now stretched so long that the 4-year-old in the blue jacket and Ninja Turtles t-shirt exists, statistically, mostly as a series of forensic estimates of a middle-aged man none of us have ever actually seen. And there's one more thing worth sitting with before we move into the final chapter of this video. A detail that a lot of true crime coverage of this case tends to skip past. Michael Dunahee didn't just disappear from his family. He disappeared from an entire generation of British Columbians who grew up with his face on their classroom walls, on the backs of milk cartons, on posters taped inside the front doors of grocery stores across the province. For an entire generation of kids who grew up in and around Victoria in the 1990s, Michael Dunahee wasn't an abstract case. He was the reason their parents suddenly wouldn't let them walk to the park alone anymore. He was the reason "stay where I can see you" stopped being a suggestion and became a rule. In that sense, whatever happened to him in those few minutes on March 24, 1991, didn't just take one child from one family. It quietly rewired how an entire region thought about childhood safety, for decades, whether people who lived through it even realized why. I don't want to end this video talking about a case file. I want to end it talking about Michael. Somewhere, there is a photograph of a little boy laughing with his baby sister, and a mother who still, 35 years later, ties an invisible knot in a hood that isn't there anymore. There is a father who has grandchildren now, hoping his son gets to meet them. There is a sister who grew up defined by an absence she can't even remember, who still shows up to a 5-kilometer walk every March to make sure her brother's name doesn't quietly disappear the way he did. That's what this case is actually about. Not a mystery to be solved for entertainment. A family that has spent more years searching than most of us have been alive. If anything in this video jogged a memory, a name, a face, a story someone once told you about Victoria in the spring of 1991, please, take it seriously enough to call it in. You don't have to be certain. The tip line exists precisely for the pieces of information that feel too small to matter. Sometimes those are the only pieces investigators are missing. I want to ask you something in the comments, and I actually want you to answer it. Knowing that 50 people were within sight of that playground, and not one of them saw anything, what do you think actually happened in those few minutes? Do you think Michael was taken by someone who planned it? Or do you think this was something closer to opportunity? Tell me what you'd investigate next if this were your case. I read every comment on these videos, and on a case like this one, your theories genuinely matter. If you want to understand cases like this one, the ones that don't get the mainstream coverage they deserve, the families still waiting decades later for someone to simply pay attention, that's what this channel exists to do. Subscribe, turn on the bell, because if there is ever a break in the Michael Dunahee case, a new tip, a new match, a new answer after 35 years, you are going to hear it here first. His name is Michael Dunahee. He was 4 years old, and somewhere, tonight, his family is still keeping the hope alive. Before you go, I want to leave you with the same detail Crystal Dunahee has returned to, publicly, more times than almost any other in 35 years of interviews. Not the composite sketch, not the tip line, not the DNA tests that never matched, the hood. The moment she knelt down in a windy parking lot and tied it a little tighter, because that's what a mother does before letting her son go play for 5 minutes. That's the whole case, in a way. An ordinary act of love, on an ordinary Sunday, that turned into the opening line of a mystery that still, 35 years later, has no ending. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. Pay attention to the small moments. Not out of fear. The Dunahees themselves have never wanted their story to be told as a warning that turns every parent into someone afraid of their own front yard. Pay attention, because those small, ordinary moments are, more often than any of us want to admit, the only ones we get. Thank you for watching this one all the way through. If this case affected you the way it's affected me putting this video together, do one more thing before you close this tab. Share it. Not for the algorithm, for Michael. Every share is one more set of eyes on a face that's been waiting 35 years to be recognized.